It is my great pleasure to introduce this evening Yaacov Ben-Yaacov.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos. So first of all, I wanted to thank Rabbi Eisenberg, Rabbi Matapansky for having us here in this beautiful building, new building of the Ida Crown Jewish Academy, and Mimi Selesky for chairing the committee, and especially Shalom and Daphne Menorah, without whom I wouldn't be here tonight. And you'll hear some interesting facts about them in my speech or talk tonight. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, until I was 17, moved to Israel. My father, may he rest in peace, was Israeli, and when we opened the boxes in Israel, there were still sheets from the white sale in 1967 when we were moving back after 6 months. It took a while. It's easy to get stuck here in the Golden Medina. And first of all, thank you all for supporting Israel. We wouldn't be there without you. And it's hard for some people to understand that in Israel, but I must tell you, I'm there, and we thank you. So tonight, I'll tell you a little bit about what I've learned about Israeli high-tech, and some of what the BDS movement forgets, because without Israel, they wouldn't be able to communicate with each other. And so first of all, if we look at Israeli high-tech, the developments are really across the board, from hardware like cell phones. Motorola Israel developed the first cell phone, was thought of here down the street, I think in Schaumburg, but the development actually happened in Israel, to medical devices like Gibbon Imaging's pill camera, to disc on keys, a good friend of mine, Dubi Moran, and gesture technology that we've only seen the beginning of. Anybody who has a kid who has a PlayStation or an Xbox uses this technology. To cardiovascular stents developed by Metanol, who's actually 3 floors up from me in the building. But if we look at what's been developed in Israel, we can see that it ranges not only from military innovations, which is difficult times we may have with administrations here, or better times. The truth is the United States is Israel's best ally, and without the funding that comes from them, we wouldn't be able to develop the Arrow systems and the Iron Dome systems that protected us with Hashem's overview 2 summers ago. But those are systems that everybody hears about, how Israelis' army and technology, and that's really where after leaving Skokie Yeshiva here for the 2 summers, that's really where I got my on-the-job training in computers. But if we look at the range of technologies that were developed in Israel, they're technologies we use every day. So I think probably everybody here searches on Google. So when you start typing and it gives you the results as you're typing, that's Israeli technology. When you instant message, today people use WhatsApp and different technologies, but ICQ was developed in Israel, and that became AOL Instant Messenger. And you didn't know it, but the car navigation systems that you use, those maps that come up, was actually something I had the honor of working on with the US Department of Defense back in the late 80s. It was probably a computer quarter the size of this room in order to bring an image of a map up on the screen in 10 minutes. And what would our kids do today who expect everything in a tenth of a second? They would have thrown the computer out the window. But voicemail was developed in Israel, and I won't tell you what the Israelis did with that technology, but let's just say we know what everybody's doing. And drip irrigation to save water, which is so precious in the world today, and especially in Israel. Today, some of the buzzwords in technology are around cybersecurity. We've all been victims of our credit card numbers being stolen. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours at the bank. I think it's easier for a criminal to use my credit card than it is for me to use it. They told me my kid in Israel charged something, so I can't use the credit card anymore. And today, our kids won't buy anything without comparing what the price is at other places. And comparison shopping was developed by a friend of mine called shopping.com that was bought by eBay. And I had the pleasure of being able to be part of moving the photo industry from the physical world to the digital world. And I'll tell you a little bit about my story tonight. So first of all, BDS likes to say they're going to have the world boycott Israel. And I say, be my guest. Because a world without Israel is a world without communication. They won't be able to talk to each other. They won't be able to chat with each other. You know, maybe we should take that away from ISIS. The world would be a better place. All firewalls and cybersecurity would be gone, and they wouldn't be able to search on the internet. So I say that they're big talkers. That being said, it's your support that helps us, and I heard there are speeches going on that they come and they protest outside, and unfortunately some of them get canceled. But we must be strong, and we must remember one thing. No different. People ask me, how is it to succeed in high tech, and what are the steps you take in order to succeed? And a matter of fact, one of our investors was the endowment fund of Stanford University. So they asked me to speak there after we sold the business, and they said, tell us the formula, right? I said, look, fact is, each of you is out $80,000 in the MBA program here. They've told you that you can get to anybody in the world because you've gone to Stanford MBA. I said, and I'm going to tell you this. I'm a monotheist. I'm a Jew, and we call it God. I said, the atheists call it luck and timing. And I can tell you without that, it does not happen. And it's really Hashem that helps us guide us. And like I said, I started here in Yeshivat HaKaitz, and we had Gemara and learning in the morning. And that was a hot summer. It was 110 degrees here. And my bar mitzvah parsha was Parshat Pinchas. And they decided when I got done with the last Aliyah that there was a mistake in the Sefer Torah in the first pasuk of the Aliyah. And let's just say the air conditioning in there was not like this building. So people say, what is it that makes it so innovative? Why are we at the top? And so I thought I'd show you a couple of interesting statistics that are out there. So first of all, per capita, we have the largest number of startups in the world and the highest number of VC dollars, venture capital dollars invested. I think last year alone, $1 to $2 billion was invested, and 700 startups have started. Now, like our kids who believe everything is instant, the new innovators in Israel believe they should have instant success and instant wealth. They're not as patient as they used to be, but they're learning. And you can really see the innovation coming out of Israel. And the interesting part is when you go to a convention, I was in Barcelona 2 weeks ago at the Mobile World Congress, where all the big companies in the world that are involved in mobile, which is basically everything today in the internet, come together. And the interesting part is our biggest enemies, quote unquote, the Syrians, the Iranians, the Saudis, they actually sit with the Israeli technologists, seeing what the newest and latest technologies are so that they can actually license them from Israel unofficially. The other interesting thing is, per capita, we have the highest number of engineers in the world. And over $75 billion of acquisitions has been done by the top companies of the world. Again, if BDS wants to boycott us, they'd not only have to boycott all the companies on this slide, including Facebook, Apple, right? I heard somebody was telling me that it was an Illinois congressman or an Illinois governor that passed a law that says that if you boycott Israel, you can't work with the government. So it would be tough to boycott all these companies. Again, we have the largest number of non-US listed companies on NASDAQ. And these are some of the companies who have their R&D centers in Israel, all over Israel. So I would say Israel is on the map. It's interesting, one of our products is distributed to the evangelical community. So I spent 2 weeks ago in Lynchburg, Virginia. I don't know if any of you have been there, but Liberty University is there. Probably saw it on one of the debates. But they tell us that Israel is innovative, and Israel's at the top because we are the chosen people. And I think everybody here, religious Zionists of Chicago, believe that, and they say, he who blesses Israel will be blessed. So I thank them for their support too. And the question is this, let's go back to fundamentals. What is it that makes an entrepreneur? Because if we can figure that out and figure out the formula, maybe we can even drive more success. So the dictionary says, I think this was the only time I opened the dictionary, I wasn't a very good student, that a person who organizes and manages any enterprise, I'm not a very good organizer, especially as a business, usually with considerable initiative and risk. So if we look, you need vision. You need to see something others don't see yet. By the way, one of the guys, I'm anti-Semite, but he had tremendous vision, was Walt Disney, right? He looked at swamps, he looked at empty lands, and he said, one day millions of people are going to go through here. You need to be able to do research. You have to have chutzpah, persistence, logic. You need to be able to navigate, and you need to be able to grow the companies. Thomas Edison said we know 1,000 ways not to build that light bulb. So I was giving a lecture at Hebrew U about 2 months ago, and they asked me to lecture to the MBA students about making right and left turns. Innovation and startups is all about making right and left turns. You never end up where you think you were going to be. And the question is, why is it that Israel breeds these entrepreneurs? So first of all, I had the honor of being in a ROTC type program in Israel called Atuda Academait. They basically say, look, we're going to do you the favor of paying your college. By the way, college in Israel, which they think is expensive, is about $1,000 or $2,000 a year. So they paid my $4,000 or $8,000 bill. And then they let you basically, for the 3 years of service and an additional 3 years, be on-the-job training. Well, the interesting part is you basically have unlimited budgets, and you're working on things that won't come to the real world for another 5 to 10 years. Now, someone in the crowd here, and I forget his name and I apologize, said to me he had studied at the Technion when I was at Machon Lev, and he said, I had to come back here because there were no jobs in engineering. So the truth is, those of us who were in the ROTC program were lucky because we actually had a job coming out of college. Today, nobody would believe that engineers coming out of school wouldn't have a job in Israel, but that's what it was like. And the army training, I went through basic training, sergeant's training, spent 6 months in Gaza, not much fun, and then officers training, and what they teach you is the following. No matter how hard or how difficult the task is, you can get it done. And even if there are 20 walls in front of you, you can get there. So that's something you need in startups because, believe me, you hit not 20, you hit 200 walls, and you have to know how to get through them. And survival is a must in Israel. We're surrounded by 22 enemies, and thank God we have Hashem up top, but you need to give him the opportunity to help you, and we try to do that. As I said, it started here at Yeshivat HaKaitz, Rabbi Eisenberg, Jerry, as we knew him then, taught us in this little room. I think in Israel we would call it like the bomb shelter. And it had the computers in there, or the typewriter, deck writer, as you see in this picture, that was connected to the computer because the computer was too big. By the time I came back the next year, there were already, Model 1 Trash 80s that we could program on. Let's just say I spent, unfortunately, more time in the computer room than I did in the base medrash, but they took me back a second year. So when I started in the Army, my parents told me, I had gone out with my wife since she was 12 and I was 15. I think these days they would have arrested me. But, and they told me I couldn't get married till I finished my degree. And the Army already has planned for you because they know when you start college and they know when you're going to end. So they have planned for you exactly where you're going to go. And I was supposed to go to this place that was going to replace the fax machine, which would be called email. And the Army was going to develop this thing together with the U.S. Army. Well, I finished my schooling 6 months early, and I got there, and there was nothing to do. But they said, we've got this 4-star general in here from the United States. Could you translate? So I figured 4 years of college, and I can be an English translator. Not bad. So I come in, and there are 6 guys in the room, and this general, and I'm translating for them, and 2 days later they said, would you like to join our unit? And that unit was the unit that developed the first digital mapping systems in the world. And we then rolled those systems out. We developed them with the US Army, and we rolled those systems out at the first Gulf War. The irony is, I trained the Saudis and the Syrians on the systems because they were part of the good side, how the world has changed. Then the last 2 years of my service, there was talk about giving the Golan Heights, quote unquote, back to the Syrians. And there was a fear that they would come with their tanks to the Kinneret, right, to the Sea of Galilee. And so we had to have a way to knock their tanks out. In those days, and this sort of leads into the next slide that I'll tell you a little bit about digital photos, the drones had film cameras on them. They could fly. You couldn't communicate with them because technology wasn't there yet. And they would come back with the pictures, and we would develop them. So there was a dream that one day we would be able to send drones in squadrons up. They would be able to communicate with each other and be able to carry armament and actually knock something out and knock the first row of Syrian tanks out. Today, all these strikes that you hear about, both in Israel and the US Army, where they used an unmanned aircraft vehicle, or they say our forces hit, right? Is this technology. And I got to work for the last 2 years of my Army service on defining what the world would look like once we had these things. Hopefully one day we'll never have to use them. We'll use them for Amazon to deliver packages. And we see that even today, I don't know if many of you use Waze, but Waze was bought for $1.2 billion by Google. So not only did we help develop their search, but we helped them on their mapping and invented. So Israel continues to reinvent mapping systems in the world today. And I think most people have these mapping systems in their cars and their cell phones today. I think my kids wouldn't know how to get somewhere without these systems. We stopped telling people directions, make a left on Main Street, right? So I started a company actually with another guy who was here, Yeshivat HaKaitz, with me, Elliot Jaffe from Cleveland, in the end of 93, beginning of 94. And the world at that time was a world that used cameras and film and paper. Actually, the interesting part was they knew people shared pictures, sent them by mail, if we remember what that is. And so they gave you double prints, right? And so I came up with an idea that at the time seemed crazy that said, well, if people can share pictures physically, wouldn't it be neat if when they dropped off a roll of film, they got their pictures back on this new medium called online? Just to give you an idea of the state of the industry at the time, there was really no browser. I think here at Northwestern, they were working on this little thing called Mosaic, and they didn't know how to show a picture. There were no JPEGs at the time, and they dreamt that one day a picture will be able to come up on the screen. So I went from place to place, asking people to give me money to develop this new thing that we would call PhotoNet or online photos, and they told me no one will ever look at a picture on a computer screen, much less on a cell phone. Not only that, our third partner, Phil Garfinkel, who was from Herndon, Virginia, his wife, I remember her standing in the kitchen and she says, no one will ever make money on pictures on the internet. So when we sold the business, I walked in and I said, I know at least 3 people who made money. So at the time, CompuServe was the #1 email service. I remember in Israel, I used to go to the main post office in Jerusalem to send a telex so that I could wait 3 days to see if I would get an answer from a company I was working with. And CompuServe came with these, if you remember, they had like 22 digits was your number on CompuServe. It wasn't like Yaacov@gmail.com. And that was really the first email services. And then this little company called America Online started, and they said they were going to make email friendly, right? You turned it on, it said, you've got mail. And they started, no one knew at the time that AOL would buy Netscape, right? And then Time Warner would buy AOL. I was offered $50,000 worth of shares in Netscape when they spun out of Mosaic, and I said, no one will ever make money out of a browser, off a browser. But I was wrong. Just a small story. So one of the venture capitalists in Israel, venture capital in Israel was just starting in 93, 94, came to me and he said, you know what, I'm going to bring somebody who I believe is going to be the future. and he's going to tell me whether pictures on the internet are going to happen. And they brought me the founder of Vocaltech. Vocaltech invented voice over IP. Most of how we speak on the phone today goes through a soft switch, it's called, in an internet network. And he shows me this voice over IP stuff, and I said, look, Chemi, this was Shimon Peres' son. I said, you're going to lose all your money. No one's ever going to talk over the internet. And he said, listen, the founder of Vocaltech says no one's ever going to look at a picture. So we were both wrong. And the challenge was that we went and tried to develop the technology. I built a prototype on one of the first Macs showing how you could take pictures, scan them, upload them to a server, and someone else in another place could actually see them. So the best scanner in the world at the time could scan 3 rolls of film an hour. It was a Kodak scanner, cost $150,000. If you remember at the time, every Walgreens, every CVS had a 1-hour photo lab. So could you imagine placing a $150,000 scanner at every one of these? By the way, Kodak only knew how to make 5 of these a year, okay? So it was not feasible. And by the way, those little pictures that we see thumbnails of on our phone that it just brings them up, it took minutes to create each one. So 36 pictures. I remember we uploaded the first roll of film at the ISP, one of the first internet service providers in Israel, and it took a day to upload that roll of film. Well, that ISP kicked me out. He said I was using too much of their bandwidth, and the people who were dialing in for internet service couldn't use the service. That guy was Shalom Menorah. I told him if he'd just give me bandwidth, I'd give him part of the company. He said I was crazy. But we were funded, thank God, with a bunch of angels. They came in and offered me $300,000 for 10% of the company at the end of '95. And they had a warrant to buy another 10% for another $300,000 3 years later, which they exercised when we exited, thank God. They made about 30 times on their money, and without them, I wouldn't have succeeded. And then in February 1996, Benchmark Capital and Oak Partners, Benchmark, let's just say they weren't the biggest lovers of Israel at the time, and US VCs had never invested in Israel. And Shlomo Kalish, MIT professor who happens to be a fighter pilot and runs a fund, he's the one that brought his friends to invest, brought these VCs, along with Michael Eisenberg, who's a venture capitalist today, and they put in $5.5 million, but they said, you must show us that 100 people will actually want to look at their pictures online every day. I think as I've been speaking here, not 100, but probably half the population of the world looked at pictures online. And this is what the world was like. So one of our biggest challenges, as crazy as it is, was to get them to actually put a place for email address on the envelopes, as crazy as that sounds. And then we had to figure out a way to figure out what they wrote on the envelope automatically. Hanukkah took a bet on us. Pathmark supermarkets and a bunch of other supermarkets were their customers. And they said, you know, people may just want to see their pictures online. We had offices in Israel, and approximately 5 people a day wanted to see their pictures online. I think half of them were my cousins, who I sent in to do it. And we had to put up posters that explained to people that you could actually drop off a roll of film and get the pictures back before you got the prints back. So it's a different world. Well, in 1996, I get this call from Germany. There's a photo show that happens there, and this guy, Yoshitaro Kumagai, calls me up and he says, you know, I know you've been talking to NTT, Nippon Telephone and Telegraph in Japan, and Hanukkah, who's your customer in the US, but that deal you're talking about to go into Japan, because what people didn't know was that out of the 1.5 billion rolls of film processed a year, 750 million was in the US and 400 million were in Japan, and the rest were in the rest of the world. By the way, do you know where most of the pictures in the world, 3% of all pictures in the world were taken at one location on this earth? Do you know where? Anybody? Disney. So Yoshitaro Kumagai calls me up. He says, look, that deal's not going to happen. At the time, we were a bunch of guys in an office. He says, I'm landing at 11 o'clock. Can you pick me up at the airport and bring me back at 4 in the morning? I said, crazier things have happened. I pick him up, He brings me a $100,000 check and he says, look, the deal's not going to happen. Why don't you go with me? I can't tell you who I represent. Well, I said to him, I can't go with you. I've got commitment to NTT and Konica. Sure enough, a month later, I fly to Japan, and I go to meet with NTT and Konica. There's a show there, and I'm walking around the show, and it wasn't like today you could get your picture on a blanket, you could get your picture on canvas. Then that technology didn't really exist, and I walked past one of the booths, and there's a mug with my kid's picture on it. Now, my kids don't look very Japanese. And that night at dinner, I put the mug on the table with NTT and Konica, and they came to tell me that the deal blew up because NTT was cheating on Konica, and they had given one of their daughter companies the software to use, only they forgot to delete my kid's picture. So that deal blew up, and Yoshitaro Kumagai went and put a deal together with the largest film finishing chain, 1 Hour Photo Labs in Japan. That was Palette Plaza. It was backed by Fuji, and we launched photos on the internet in Japan to cell phones. And I had this great idea. I don't know how many of you have been to Japan, but there are basically 7-Elevens at every corner. And so I had this great idea, and Japanese visit there 3 times a day. They go there for breakfast, they go there during their lunch break, and on their way home, they go there as well. And the milk trucks visit there twice a day. So I had this great idea that somebody would leave a picture off at the 7-Eleven, the milk truck would pick it up, take it to a lab, scan it, bring it back, and you'd get it on your phone. It was a terrible idea. The Japanese did not want to see themselves on their phones. And I'll tell you what happened. First of all, that's 1996 technology, top of the line, how pictures looked on the cell phones. Needless to say, this is why they didn't want to see themselves. So I show up in Japan in December 96, and there's $500,000 of the $1 million missing in the bank. And I say, where's the money? How can you just use half the money without talking to anybody? And they tell me, by the way, they spent $300,000 on these little characters called Pokemon and Pikachu. They had just come out. I'm coming from Israel and the US, and I'm like, are you nuts? And then they took $100,000 and bought pictures of Sonic Hedgehog. By the way, remember how those pictures looked on the cell phone? They didn't look very good. And $100,000 for pictures of horses, dogs, and cats. It turned into the largest content play on cell phones. You could basically subscribe for $3 a day, and 12 months later, 500,000 Japanese had Pikachu, Pokemons, and Sonic Hedgehogs for $3 a month. So this teaches you one thing. First of all, it's got to be Hashem that's guiding us, because I never would have thought of that. And not only that, but when you go into a region, and I have the pleasure to work in Japan again with my new startup, you have to trust the people there. Cultures are different all over the world. What works in India doesn't work in Japan, and what works in Japan won't work in the US. So unfortunately, or fortunately, we got to the point where more than 5 people wanted to see their pictures online every day. And at that point, we had a bigger problem. There were no scanners. So we went out and bought the Lockheed Martin's postal scanning division. It's what they use to scan the envelopes to know how to route them and how to send them to the right place. Rabbi Eisenberg had taken me to CADP, so I was like, big processing. I think we can do that. And we developed 2 scanners. One on the right, which basically could scan 300 rolls of film an hour. If you guys remember, there used to be these little things called mail order labs that you could take an envelope, put your film in it, and 3 days later you'd get your pictures back, or 5 days later by mail. So this would sit in the mail order labs, and it would scan all the pictures. And these sat in over 3,000 retail outlets with 1 hour photo shops, so that they could scan pictures and put them online. And by this time, thank God, we got our second $2.2 million, or $3.3 million, because we could show that more than 100 people a day wanted to see pictures online. Picture vision expanded. We went to Sears Portrait Studios, JCPenney Portrait Studios, AOL You've Got Pictures, Yahoo Photos, Sony Image Station, and everybody jumped in the bandwagon. People don't know it, but Snapfish, which is now part of HP, was actually Neil Cohen, who ran York and Clark Mail Order Labs, came to me and he said, I think it's time for the Mail Order Labs to get online. And that was Snapfish. So the problem was this. These companies all decided that they wanted to create silos, meaning they didn't want you, they would allow you to share pictures, but if you shared a picture with your cousin in Arkansas, and that cousin wanted to print the picture at home, they couldn't print it. They said the way we are going to control them, I'm back to the mic. They told me to go back to the mic. My mother never told me that I have a low voice, but hopefully you can hear me better. So there was a problem that they told you that if you wanted a print and you had uploaded, and by this time digital cameras had started to come out, if you had uploaded pictures to Kodak, you had to order prints from Kodak. And if you had used Walgreens, you had to order from Walgreens. And I said, this is crazy. There's got to be a way to break this. And at the time, the way we were making money is every roll of film that was dropped off and you wanted online, you paid an extra buck. We got 50 cents. The channel got 50 cents. Life was good. So we went to the inkjet guys and we said, will you give us part of the inkjet revenue if we drive more pictures to the inkjet printers? And they said gladly because, and it was funny, DuPont had showed, here's a can of paint, right? And here's a little inkjet cartridge. And they never believed they would sell paint for so much money. And so they said, we'll give you 15% of what the consumer pays for the price of ink, and you can give it to whoever you want. And that's what we did. We put together a system where the money went back to Best Buy and AOL and Walgreens and all these folks and launched basically the first clearinghouse, very similar to how when you pull cash out of a cash machine, part of the money of that $2 annoying fee goes back to your bank. So we launched that, and that really led us to success. We were in every magazine you can imagine. We were on Oprah, we were on the Today Show, we were on Lou Dobbs' Money Talk, and what people didn't know is we had 2 months of money left in the bank when we sold the company. So we don't tell people that. It sounds better the way Rabbi Eisenberg put it on that summary. But we sold 51% of the company to Kodak and AOL in 1998. And then after the internet bubble burst, about 4 months later, we were already making a lot of money, and they actually bought the second half for twice the price. And the Japanese company went public based on those Pokemon and Pikachus for $80 million on NASDAQ Japan, and it's still profitable today. So at the time that Kodak bought us, and thank God we took cash, they were netting $1 billion a year. I think my time's almost up, so I'm going to finish in a second, but I'm going to tell you one more story. Kodak at the time was spending, besides the $1 billion they were making, they were spending $1 billion on pure research. So for example, those screens that you see in the back or over here, OLED technology was developed by Kodak. They just didn't know how to commercialize things. Well, I come in, and the first thing Kodak does is they give me this stack of papers, and they say, okay, we start budget review, right, in August, because by November we have to submit the new budget. So I start going through the things. They were spending, I think, something just in my division, $150,000 a month on internal conference calls that were being set up that were never happening. Okay, this was the efficiency of Kodak. But the most interesting thing was the lab where they had a bunch of researchers researching how to improve the picture. And the thing that struck me is the researchers were looking at pictures, at prints, under a microscope. And I was like, people don't look at pictures under a microscope. So what I did is I went to the local school and I asked them to take a classroom and ask the parents to give us pictures of each of the kids in the classroom. By the way, these days you probably couldn't do that because of privacy laws. And I brought them to the Kodak researchers and had them, quote unquote, improve the pictures, and I put them in 3 rooms. And I brought the parents of the kids to the Kodak labs. And they went from room to room, and I told them something very simple. Please take off the wall the picture that doesn't look good. Miraculously, no one took any pictures off the walls. Neither the bad ones, quote unquote, nor the ones that were in the rooms that were improved. And the researchers were blown away. I think they were spending on that project something like $50 million a year. And I said to the CEO of Kodak, who was a Jew, George Eastman was probably rolling in his grave. He was an anti-Semite as well. And I said to him, I said, you see, the problem is people look at pictures, and when they see their kid, they don't see that his face may be a little bit green. I said, and you're not trying to tune that the face is a little bit green. You're trying to tune that under a microscope, you can look at the picture and it will look better. I said, so those people on that project didn't like me very much, and that project got canceled and they got moved on to bigger and better things. But that was the state of the industry. It was a chemical and paper industry at the time. And thank God we took part in helping move that industry forward. So what's interesting is Kodak, as you know, went into bankruptcy. If we look at them from 98 to 2011, they basically became worthless, quote unquote. And today they are a professional printing company. By the way, if any of you have ever used those Kodak kiosks that are out there, where you can put a card in and print your pictures and stuff like that, we rolled out 30,000 of them after they had purchased us. And we networked them all. And you have, I don't know, a Jew who studied in Skokie maybe isn't the one who should be saying this, but they wanted us to be able to make it so the Santa Claus pictures would be online. So we networked all the malls, so the minute you took a picture with Santa Claus, it would be at Grandma's house. And 2 days before they started taking pictures at the malls, and this will tell you why Kodak got to where they got to, they pulled the networks out. Because they said, you know, if we delay digital, we'll make more money, because mom won't buy, or dad, won't buy the $30 8x10 for grandma if grandma can see it online immediately. Well, they were wrong. The truth is that grandma will buy pictures as well. And we still, by the way, prints are still a huge business today. It's not that that business went away. And the question always somebody asks me is, okay, well, you killed an industry. And the truth is we didn't kill an industry. Because if you look up here, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, WhatsApp, these would not exist without pictures online. Could you imagine Facebook if there were no pictures? Or WhatsApp if there were no pictures? So the truth is that a $10, $15 billion industry probably turned into a $1 trillion industry that it is today. And thank God we had the pleasure to being part of that. So I'll just end with one note. If you go around Israel, you ask, so what is it that makes Israelis, quote unquote, so smart? And I think in last week's Parsha we have the answer to this. And the answer is this. God told us, right? Bezalel and Aholiab. Aholiab, by the way, is interesting to me because I got married on that street in Israel, in Jerusalem. It says, Ish chacham lev asher natan Hashem chokhmah. It's not that we created ourselves and we taught ourselves, or the army taught us. That's not what it is. It's God who gave us that knowledge and that chokhmah and binah, and we should always remember that. And so I am very honored to speak here tonight to the religious Zionists of Chicago, because we all know that it's Hashem that guides us. And hopefully, as we started the evening, we should only have peace in Israel. And that's what I tell my friends. I say, we pray 3 times a day for peace. We want peace. And we should only have peace, and Hashem should guide us to a good place. And I think if we, act nice to each other and understand each other, Hashem will bless us with this and continue to bless Israel with being leaders in the high-tech world. And thank you very much.
I just was enjoying every part of this presentation, and I would love to be able to really feel that I could take some credit, but Baruch Hashem, you know, in education, we don't always see our successes, and it's wonderful to be able to see so many successes that we've had in the yeshiva and here at the academy and across the board in chinuch and in education. You see your students eventually come out and accomplish great things, and we're very pleased, we're very happy and very proud, and thank you so much for coming, Yaacov. Well, we're now moving to the second part of the program. I want to thank first all the sponsors. Not going to list the names, but you'll see them in program books that are out in the tables. We're moving to the Bed Cafe for the food and music. We'll have the raffle later on. Please, everybody, just enjoy the rest of the evening. Out through the doors and to the right. Have a great time.